sécurité, on a besoin de personnel, on a besoin de talent et ça fait parfois partie des grands défis pour une organisation, qu'elle soit gouvernementale, on en parlait avec Steve Waterhouse plus tôt ce matin, que dans les entreprises privées. Alors sans plus tarder, et gardez vos questions hein, parce que autant en ligne, on répondra à vos questions sur la plateforme et dans la salle aussi à la fin si vous en avez à notre prochain invité, Rob Davidson. Rob est Director of Data aux sciences du Conseil des technologies de l'information et des communications de Cybersecurity Talent Supply Chain. C'est le nom de la conférence. Ça commence dans quelques secondes.
Welcome everyone to this discussion about Canada's cybersecurity talent supply chain. And this is an important topic, not just for now, but for the next coming years. And just to talk a little bit about where I'm from. So I'm from the Information Communication and Technology Council, and I'm part of the digital think tank. We do evidence-based research on Canada's digital economy at the intersection of the future of work, emerging technologies, and social impact. And we also have a group that does capacity building within our organization, research-informed programs to Canadians that meets the needs of digital economy today and tomorrow, including cybersecurity. So I like to start just talking about a few things that whenever I do a presentation, I like to take a step and look in the past week and just see what stories are relevant to what we're going to be talking about. And one of the ones from last week was, of course, the hackers steal about $600 million in one of the biggest crypto heists ever. And this should not be a surprise. And it's going to become more a problem. And maybe some of you have heard one of the leaders for the Conservative Party federal campaign is going to try to push for blockchain and crypto as a key element of Canada's economy going forward. So we're going to have a handle on these things as we move into that world. Also, lots of information. We just actually finished a report with Propulsion Quebec on electric vehicles. We'll be releasing that in a couple weeks, I believe. And that is a project where we're talking about Quebec's capacity to be able to support a vibrant electric vehicle economy. And also there's in the news from last week, automakers cybersecurity lagging behind tech adoption, according to some experts. And this is not just some small organization that's jumping into it. This is with Honda. So the idea that we need to have talent is really important. And if we even look at the governments within Canada, there's of course more news about the breach that happened in Newfoundland last year, and that more health information was stolen in the Newfoundland cyber attack than governments originally reported. And this is a real challenge going forward because we have a lack of cybersecurity talent in Canada, and governments have a hard time competing for that talent. They don't necessarily have the ability to offer the same perks that private sector can offer or the same sorts of salaries. So there's a real need to focus on cybersecurity from a talent pipeline perspective. And of course, I can't miss this particular headline from last year, which was wanted millions of cybersecurity professionals, salary whatever you want. And this was from the US, and it's just as applicable to Canada. And to kind of go to last year's ISC Squared's cybersecurity workforce study of 2021, we could see that their numbers for Canada is that there's a shortfall of 25,000 cybersecurity professionals right now in Canada versus 377,000 in the US and some of the other numbers from other countries. And it would seem like we're kind of have a less of a problem by population around those numbers. But if you actually look at it per population, you can see that we actually have a smaller cybersecurity workforce by population and by tech endeavors within the country, meaning that we're probably already behind the curve and we haven't even hit the peak of our shortfall. So there's going to be a real need to develop cybersecurity talent in Canada over the next 5 to 10 years. And so some of the things, I'm just going to highlight some of the data that we have developed and looking at sort of what are the skills that are in demand in the workplace right now for cybersecurity. And we're looking at both technical skills and the soft interpersonal skills that are going to be important. So things like network security, information security, the ability to do penetration testing, risk management, network analytics, and red teaming and blue teaming within control centers, all are very important. And also things like being able to operate in different environments, whether that's on traditional operating systems or within a cloud context. But one of the things that we've seen a lot more demand for is not just the technical talent, but the ability to work in a highly stressful and sometimes and very dynamic world of cybersecurity. So that means you'd have to have the ability to troubleshoot, strong communication skills to work within teams, project management, being able to handle stress and crisis resiliency. This one in particular has come out with the people that we've interviewed, that a lot of the talent that comes out is maybe technically strong, but is not prepared for dealing with crisis situations. And so how do you even teach that? That is a challenge. Also, that because this domain changes so quickly and you have to keep up with the cyber criminals and those nation states that are acting as bad actors, you have to have a lifelong learning strategy and adaptability built into the overall capability of the system. And then just some highlights of some particular skills that have bubbled to the top on programming languages, things like Python, SQL, C#, and also platforms, whether that's being security information and event management, the NIST cybersecurity framework from the US, Cisco systems products, Splunk, and also intrusion detection systems. But what we're also seeing is that there's specific demands for specific roles that are coming up in sort of a lot of the analysis that we do. And it's not just generic cybersecurity jobs. And this was the case about 5 years ago in Canada, where people were looking at more generic roles, so sort of jack-of-all-trade people. And now we're seeing specific requirements around cybersecurity specialists, cybersecurity engineers, cybersecurity analysts, cybersecurity architect, also cloud security and penetration testers. We're also seeing, and we don't really have a lot of information on this yet, but it seems like that there's a lot of organizations who are putting in certifications into their job postings for cybersecurity talent. And so we're seeing things like the CISSP, the CISMs, the GIACs, the CISAs, all these different demands are in-demand certifications that people are putting on their job postings to hire people. And so the likelihood that a lot of people have all of these is pretty low, but these are the ones that are at least in the most demand at this point in time. So we've kind of looked at some of these things, and we've looked at some of the technical versus soft skills. And what I want to bring to your attention is that we at ICTC, one of our initiatives is called the National Advisory Committee on Cybersecurity Training. So what we've done is we've brought together professionals from large organizations, some small to medium-sized organizations, also people from just the cybersecurity industry and post-secondary institutions to develop a Canadian cybersecurity talent roadmap. So this is something that has been lacking and something that we are engaging on, and we started this last year, and we've begun with some research to support them, and that's where I came in. I'm part of the research team that's doing the look at this. And so there's a couple of different components to this, but what we've done is the INAC committee actually came up with a number of assumptions that they wanted us to run through research and validate. And so here are some of the key assertions that the working groups came up with. And so there was 3 working groups, one on skill and post-secondary institution program gaps, also on what are some of the alternative delivery mechanisms that they can engage and leverage as part of post-secondary education learning, and what are some of the barriers that people going through cybersecurity training have experienced. So the first thing is on the skill gaps. And one of the first things that they identified was that there is a lack of communication between industry and academia on the terms of what expectations are for new graduates and co-op post-secondary students. This was actually also one of the insights from the barriers subcommittee as well, is that there's really a disjointness between what post-secondary institutions are necessarily teaching people and how they're teaching them versus what the industry and the private sector is expecting the students to have when they're coming out. They also identified that there's a lack of a nationally used skills framework. So if you look at the US, they have the NICE framework, and that has impeded the recognition and pursuit within a cybersecurity career for post-secondary students. So this is another one of their positions. And also they believe that the lack of a pan-Canadian job data with skills mapping, so ability to take what are sort of the needs of the private sector and government and all other groups that are hiring cybersecurity professionals, and mapping that against what skills people are coming out of school with, and so what are the gaps. So being able to identify the differences and be able to essentially highlight where people need to work on their skill portfolio. Within alternative delivery, they believe that there are multiple learning and in particular experience pathways to be qualified in cybersecurity. In particular, the pathways piece is very critical, because one of the things across the board that we see is that most organizations don't want to hire somebody that has no cybersecurity experience. So what we have out there really in the marketplace is no transitional way for people to really enter it. It seems to be a little bit organic, but not very structured. So you can think that in the legal world, you have your students come out and they article, and then they move on. Or if you're an engineer, you go in and you do your apprenticeships and your professional designations. There's not really that pathway for the cybersecurity people. So we have all this demand, but not a mechanism to move students to a point where they're hireable. So that is a challenge. There's also the ability for targeted micro-learning experiences. So you can think of micro-credentials that focus on a very specific set of skills that are very short-term in nature, that can be used to bring people's skill sets up after or during sort of their post-secondary institution experience. And that these can be used to bridge those skill gaps. And of course, these tools are very familiar in the cybersecurity world through sort of the certification programs and keeping up with your skill sets. Some of the challenges there, of course, is sometimes the cost. In particular, if you're not currently employed, can you afford to go for one of those certifications? The last topic that the working groups were looking at were barriers. And so looking at, for post-secondary students who have actually self-selected out of cybersecurity careers due to the lack of traditional cybersecurity foundational skills they feel they lack. This was something that the committee came up with specifically because one of our organizations, it's a very large telecom company, the person that runs their cybersecurity is actually not from a STEM background. They're actually from a humanities background. And their top 4 managers are probably not from a STEM background as well. But what they have experienced is that when students are looking at cybersecurity as a career, they don't see those other options in the career path. They only see the technical needs of cybersecurity. Whereas at various levels within the cybersecurity management supply chain, you do need to have people with multiple different skills and people that have those sort of crisis management capabilities. So they wanted to identify this. And so what we did around this was we did some typical meta research on pulling together lots of different outside research on this topic, but also we did 2 surveys. We surveyed employers to see what their expectations were of graduating students for cybersecurity. And then we also surveyed the students. What are their expectations? How do they self-assess their ability to get a job? And it was really to see, is there a disconnect there? And sure enough, there was. I'll cut to the punchline there. But there was definitely a difference in expectations between what the employers thought the students should be coming to the marketplace with and what the students thought they were taking to the market. So let's kind of first go right to some of the employer survey findings. And this is from the skill program gaps point of view. And these are the tech skill gaps. For employers, these are the cybersecurity skills graduates are most lacking. Cloud security was the number one. Now, this is not surprising because it's not necessarily something that's easily taught in a post-secondary institution's framework because it's cross-sectional. It involves a lot of different pieces. So it's not essentially just one part of the story. So cloud security was their number one that they identified. Also, though, the other cross-sectional ones, such as incident reporting, response, so handling those situations where how to monitor, how to track, and how to respond was also something that they didn't have a point of view on or even a perspective or context to bring into the marketplace. And then digital forensics, so the ability to study particular incidents and figure out what is happening and be able to come up with mitigations. Those are obvious ones for most people because they're the ones that would involve some experience and or things that universities and colleges don't normally teach. But at the same time, they're things that you would expect them coming out of the schools with from a technical perspective, things like network and internet protocols and operating systems were also identified as weaknesses. And we've had a few of our members of our committee indicate that this is the case, that not every student, even if they're coming from a computer science background or a strong technical networking background, don't learn all the aspects of the tech stack that will be exposed through cybersecurity attacks. So there is a need to focus on all of these areas to help fill some of these gaps that are out there. Also, and this might be a little hard to see in this dimension here, but these are from a framework perspective, and going back to sort of what are the frameworks that employers care about, and they do care about, or at least think that are important to some extent, just about all of the cybersecurity frameworks, whether it's NIST or the ISO or SOC. You can see that really there's not much of a difference between these, that there's at least somewhat important or very important as a combination. And so that is the employer side with the various colors. And, oh, is it showing on the screen? Okay, good. I just wanted to check. And then there's the student one, which has the cybersecurity frameworks. How many of these are you aware of? And outside of maybe the ISO one and the NIST, there's not a lot of awareness of the various frameworks out there, which is something that the committee did bring forward, that these are things that are not being related to the students. Whether they're actually relevant in the workplace for a lot of these people is the next question. But the fact is that employers are saying that these frameworks are important for their internal strategies. They're kind of leveraging these frameworks to implement their cybersecurity strategy and want people to be able to walk in with at least a context for those. So one of the good things here on the skill, well, it's still a problem, but we're getting there, is on job data. So this is another thing that the committee brought up. And for anybody that tracks labor force information in Canada and has to work with sort of the National Occupation Category Classification Code, or NOC codes, you'll know that historically there is no information about cybersecurity isolated from being in a bubble with things like software engineering, network management. There was essentially, you had no ability to say, well, how many people in Canada are in the cybersecurity profession? You were not able to disaggregate that from what Stats Canada collected from that. So for the first time, 2021, they've introduced that there is a new NOC code for cybersecurity specialists. And so this gives us the ability going forward to track this. They're only starting to do this now. So unfortunately, from a sort of a planning perspective and a research perspective, there's not a lot of evidence yet of this information. Plus the fact we also have to have the people in the field to be able to, when they're essentially given a labor force survey out into the private sector every month, they have to fill it out, and so they have to know now to code to these new codes. So there'll be probably a lag to get accurate information there before we start getting it, but at least there is a move in this. Now, as you can see here, though, there's no granularity to this particular code at this point in time, that it's cybersecurity specialists only. So we won't be able to essentially differentiate between sort of, in particular, jobs that might be entry-level for some people coming out of post-secondary institutions, and which are the ones that are more situated for more senior experienced people. So there's still going to be some data gap that will be out there that we will not be able to leverage. And so we still have to do things like scraping job data off of various job posting sites to get sort of an inclination of where the market is going from a cybersecurity perspective. So on to sort of the next set of questions, and that's on alternative delivery. And what is it that employers value? So in this case, the number one things that employers value is demonstration of appropriate technical skills wherever or however they are acquired. So this is what, when hiring people, what they care about the most, they just want the talent. They don't really care necessarily that they have an appropriate level of post-secondary education or certification. You can see that it's ranked third out of the four, which is appropriate level of post-secondary, demonstration of appropriate soft skills wherever or however they were acquired, demonstration of appropriate technical skills wherever and however they are acquired, and significant cybersecurity work experience. Well, the two top ones are the demonstration of appropriate technical skills and also the significant cybersecurity work experience. So this kind of gives us a framing that, at least with the employers that participated in the survey, they're not hung up on people necessarily having a specific degree or not. They're more concerned about either them having significant experience already, not a good sign for people that are coming out of post-secondary education, or that they can demonstrate the appropriate technical skills. And that's another one that's a challenge. Like, unless that's something that's part of the hiring process to maybe put them through a challenge or an assignment to show what they know, it will really be just the resume and the cover letter that's going to be used as an indicator of their ability. Also, one of the things that came up was the idea of micro-credentials. And so this is not all the data that we've collected. This is kind of just a preview, and this particular report on cybersecurity talent will be produced probably just before the summer or early summer. So we'll be publishing that. And so one of the things about alternative delivery and micro-credentials is we asked, does your organization currently employ any technical employees with micro-credentials? So the majority, or at least the one that had the highest score, was yes, but only as additional to other education. So what that's saying is they wouldn't necessarily take somebody who's done a lot of online courses and a couple of micro-credentials and assemble that into a career portfolio of skills to go forward with to the marketplace. But that they can, there was a few people that did say that micro-credentials alone could be sufficient for the job. And in those cases, it's mostly because they're having so much trouble finding talent out there. But then there was another number of people that do not currently have people hired for it, or they're not sure if they even have them on staff or not, probably because they don't necessarily know if they took courses in the past that were micro-credentials. And we'll just skip over those. And also, we looked at what were the reasons that for those students that chose to leave a cybersecurity career path, what were their reasons for leaving? And the number one reason that people said that they were in school, they were taking a cybersecurity career path, but then they changed their minds, is that better opportunity in another career path was the answer. So that's either that they got frustrated with sort of that they weren't seeing maybe a career path into cybersecurity, or that let's say it's a computer science student, they actually saw that they might be able to get a better job with better work-life balance, perhaps, in that career path rather than a specialization in cybersecurity. Another group, which isn't surprising, is that they said it was too technical. And so that might be for some of the students. And in our final report, we'll have the breakdown by different degree programs, which were the ones that picked too technical as a one. Actually, one of the ones, just as an interesting aside, one of the groups of students that did drop out due to it being too technical were engineers. So that's surprising, and it will be interesting for us to do follow-up on that down the line. The other one was that they lost interest. And again, whether it is that they saw something else in their career path that they wanted to pursue, or that it was just that the coursework itself was not interesting enough to engage them, was a problem. One of the things that we found, and this could be mostly due to the fact that our outreach did not reach these students that dropped out of cybersecurity, but this group, at least that answered, did not identify that there were diversity barriers to this. But I would suspect that's more the fact that it's very hard to find somebody who has dropped out of cybersecurity and gone on to do something else than it is to find a student that actually graduated from it. So that would be my interpretation of that, is it's not that there aren't diversity barriers or cultural barriers in the cybersecurity industry, it's just that it's not reflected in this. Also, though, one of the things that was interesting is that students didn't choose need for security clearances and background checks to get a job, yet one of the things our committee did identify is that for a number of jobs, organizations will require security checks along the lines of the same that government expects for their cybersecurity roles, and particularly for new immigrant students and for people that are from outside the country, effectively. It becomes a barrier for them because they are not necessarily able, or they're concerned about going through the security check process, because from where they're coming from, that usually ends in a bad way. So this is an interesting one to explore down the line as well. So, also, for the people who dropped out of cybersecurity, there are definitely, and we were looking at sort of work-integrated learning opportunities, because this goes to the fact, well, how do we get students that are in an educational program in colleges or universities, how do we get them the skills that they need, but also the experience that these organizations are expecting? So work-integrated learning programs like co-op or internships becomes a valid way of, first off, getting the students some experience, but also it's an opportunity for those employers that bring in those students to be able to see what those skill sets are. Essentially, trial that student out before hiring long term to see if they do bring the skill sets that they need. So we found that for the students that had dropped out, if the availability of a work-integrated program was there, would they have continued on their cybersecurity career path? And the majority of them did say yes. So this is something that needs to be considered when we're looking at this. And there's those two compelling aspects to that. The one being, hey, all these employers, we're expecting people to have some experience. We don't want to trust our most precious assets in a digital sense to raw rookies. And so how do we get those experiences and also the trust between sort of the students and the employers? And it turns out that work-integrated learning opportunities is one of those ways. The other thing we found was that most of the students that did drop out of cybersecurity career path also thought that the availability of those micro-credential programs that could quickly fill their skill gaps that they were worried about, they would have stayed in the program as well. So there's definitely, this is all working towards a pilot that we'll probably be creating, which will kind of try to prove this scenario as well in the workplace. There's also, for the students that actually stayed in cybersecurity, we asked the same questions about what are some of the things that negatively impacted them during their experience. Excuse me. And one of the ones was that they identified too technical as the #1 reason that they felt cybersecurity was problematic. And that's kind of interesting, is that there's this feedback that it's too technical, yet when they're graduating, the employers themselves are identifying they don't have those soft organizational management skills that are necessary to be functional in their workplace. They also identified the next two were too stressful, and the idea that it's too much of a time commitment. Now, how that measures up against other programs would be interesting to see, but it is sort of, these are the things that they identified. And again, for the students that are in cybersecurity programs, they did not define diversity barriers or cultural barriers as sort of the highest level ones that were available for them to choose from. Whoops, let's go back. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is about cybersecurity adjacent jobs. And this goes to the idea that it's not just about the front line in the trenches people doing the cybersecurity and sort of the built out of the ecosystem to protect organizational data and systems. It's also about what are the sort of ancillary roles that are necessary to complete that system. One of the areas, of course, is cyber insurance. And this is necessary, particularly right now when you look at what the Canadian government is doing. So the Canadian government just rolled out what's called the Canadian Digital Adoption Program, which is to motivate small to medium-sized enterprises to accelerate their digitization. Yet they're not necessarily including in that program the protection of those assets that they're now digitizing and their work systems. So there's a challenge for a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, and not all of them are aware that they can protect themselves through cyber insurance. And so we need people in the ecosystem, insurance companies that offer this, like Desjardins does. You know, sort of the things that you have to concern yourselves with. Mostly it says, how much data do you have that people will try to get at and leverage or sell, either ransomware it or sell it, or both, in the cases of Newfoundland. And also, what are the devices or where is the data? So is it in the cloud? Is it on secure systems internally? Is it on a whole bunch of portable devices that, because everybody is, or most people are still working from home, essentially there's data all over the place. And so you have to be aware, A, what are the sort of the prerequisites for getting the insurance for that scenario, and whether you have to follow certain rules and deploy certain protocols to be able to be essentially insured or without breaking your insurance ability. So also people have to understand that it's not just about your sort of legal and your civil damages, but also the ability to do your crisis management. Also to be able to do your forensic investigation to find out what has happened. So you can start to see the sorts of roles that'll come out of this. So there'll be legal experts, there'll be insurance experts, there'll be forensics experts, crisis management people, and also how do you sort of have people come in and help you with the ransomware situations that do arise. So this is one of the areas that will be part of the ecosystem that a lot of people could go into from a workforce perspective. And then, of course, when you're dealing with software development, you have to have your software, or if you, particularly for Canada, where we want to play in the global market for enterprise software and platforms, you have to have secure development. And so you have to ask those questions about, whenever you're developing something, what are the security implications of this? How are we architecting it? Where is all the data? Where are the systems located? Where are sort of the attack vectors that can be exploited? And how do you make supportive security tools available for those doing the development? I know my son works for a government agency, and he regularly tells me about how there are problems with the security that is offered to their systems. And that you really need to challenge your team's security practices. So you can think that not just within sort of a deployed system that you should do sort of red team, blue team testing, but you should be doing it actively during the development process to validate what it is that you're going to be concerned with going forward. So we do have to look at the secure development as well as part of the overall cybersecurity chain of events. So I just wanted to draw attention to some other research we've done in the past that I've been involved with on cybersecurity. And so this is from 2020. So the only thing I wanted to point out here, that the difference between what we have as our current information, is that the cloud has risen up to be the most important security aspect out there for most organizations. And that's not surprising given how many companies are digitizing, how many of them are shifting their operations to the cloud, in particular, the small to medium-sized organizations that are shifting to the cloud. And that's because they can't afford buying their own infrastructure. So, of course, that's their most likely place to set up. And then, of course, I've talked about this, but also we saw the same things back in 2020, that these were the top certifications that people were looking for. So we can understand from this that the demand for skills in that are shifting a little bit, but there's some static things out here that we still don't have good responses for in particular, people coming right out of school. They're not going to have these certifications right off the bat. We also did a research project back in 2019 for the Transport Canada about developing the cyber talent for Canadian road authorities. And at the time, Marc Garneau said that, connected and automated vehicles are really important, and that Canada needs highly qualified professionals to help Canada and to ensure that the cybersecurity of our transport system. As you saw with the news story about the automobile industry, this is still a challenge, and it's not necessarily been solved. So I wanted to draw attention to this particular slide because it really talks to sort of the holistic view of a cybersecurity operation within an organization, so that you can look at it for within a transport authority, that you have to deal with cybersecurity at the design stage. That's usually where you'll have your cybersecurity architect involved, a very specific role that will have to have experience in the past, and also update a risk management plan as part of for the overall organization. You also have to have people involved in the procurement process. So a cybersecurity engineer to make sure that the RFP addresses all the requirements from a cybersecurity technical perspective. Same thing goes for the implementation. So we've designed a system, we've procured and built the parts that we need. Now we're putting it all together so that you need to manage the system on implementation and to update the risk management plan from any deviations from the original design. Then you have to test it. That's where you bring in your vulnerability testers, your pen testers using red team protocols to test out that system, and that have your cybersecurity engineer mitigate those problems. And that from operations perspective, you have to have your incident analysis analysts and your response people, your cybersecurity engineers still to mitigate that, and probably your cybersecurity architect come back in and help with the audits, along with vulnerability testers, cybersecurity engineer, and risk management people. So that this becomes an overall need for most operations to be able to look at it from this holistic view, and that in a lot of cases, organizations can't necessarily afford to bring in their own cybersecurity architect. They'll probably bring that in on a consultancy basis or hire a firm to do that for them, because A, they're rare, and B, probably too expensive to bring in for the long term. So they'll probably bring them in for the design phase, contract for them on the regular audit phases. And then there'll be some of that mixture within some of the other roles. But the key thing is there's lots of roles that need to be involved when you're looking at cybersecurity systems. And one of the other things, just before I wrap up, is to talk about our capacity building side at the Information Communications Technology Council. And that is the Cyber Titan program. So this is a distinctly Canadian program that we offer through our capacity building group. And so this is, it's offered in affiliation with the US Cyber Patriot program. That's through the US Air Force. And so Cyber Titan is Canada's only national cybersecurity competition for middle and high school students. And we provide them with the necessary skills to help go for and pursue a post-secondary education. So this is kind of helping to try to create the linkage between K-12 and the post-secondary world. And now the other part, of course, that we have to work on is connecting the post-secondary graduates to the workforce. But it's interesting that this has teams from all across Canada that participate. Last year, I think it was a team from North York that won this competition. And I believe the year before that, it was a team from Manitoba, so from Winnipeg, that won. So it really gives students the ability to see what a cybersecurity career is and what are some of the things that you can do within that in a sort of a fun competition as well. So it sets the place of more people going for the cybersecurity career. Now we have to have the post-secondary institutions have the programs that interest people, keep them engaged, and also produce what the workforce and the employers are looking for. And then if we kind of deal with that, then we won't need that INACT committee anymore because we will solve the problem. But unfortunately, that won't happen probably very quickly. And one of the other things just to point out is that we also have a job skill matching tool. And of course, the ability to see based on sort of saying what skills you have. So this is something that's free, available, that was funded by federal government ESDC to develop this, is to essentially put in the skills that you have from a various number of technical skills. And then it suggests what kind of match you have for various career possibilities. And so in this case, for cybersecurity professional, there's a number of skills that are necessary that in this person's case, they only were about a 25% match, and it identifies those skill gaps. We're continuing to advance this to include more skills, a soft skills component, and this is something that's freely available to the general public, but also we are directing it at a number of programs, and particularly for students, to be able to see, are they ready? Are they learning the right things? And so that they can, if those micro-credential programs are available through their school, they can take them. One example is one of our committee members is Red River College in Manitoba. And so they've partnered with a couple of the certification agencies in cybersecurity to essentially offer micro-credentials of sort of the really entry points into the certification process. So they're complementing their own cybersecurity program with these micro-credentials, and they're partnering externally to do that. This is some of the innovation that we probably need to see to have the marketplace match up with what employers expect and what is necessary, really, from sort of the demands of the cybersecurity world. And that's my presentation, and I'm open to questions after the music.